Thanks for joining us from wherever you are in the world for this latest Provar webinar, where we'll be taking a deep dive into maintainable UI testing. A little bit of housekeeping before we get going. This webinar will be recorded, and everyone will be sent the link to the recording after the event. And we will be taking questions. There's a QA function, so please do put your questions in there as we move through the content, and we'll get to those at the end. So with that being said, we'll just do some quick introductions. My name is Nick Wapel. I head up product marketing here at Provar, and I'm very pleased to say that I have with me today, firstly, Geraint Waters. So, IG, do you want to give us a quick intro?
Hi, Nick. Hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, I'm Geraint Waters. I'm the Provar co-founder. So I'm extremely excited. My first webinar for a while. Yes, we are a test automation platform with deep experience at Salesforce. Good to speak to you.
Cool, thanks, G. And we also have Sukhdeep Gill, who is one of the newer members of Provar. I'm very happy to have him on with us today. Sukh, do you want to give us a quick intro and then kick us off into the conversation?
Sure. Thanks, Nick, and thanks, G. I'm super excited to be here, and I'm super excited to learn how we can accelerate and enable our customers to get so much of their great tech investments tested and out to their end customers. So, G, as you know, I recently joined Provar. I'm on day 30-something, and I came from almost 10 years at Salesforce. And what I realized that testing a technology before releasing it to end users is vital. If things don't work, people, specifically customers and the end users, they actually lose trust and confidence. And this leads into so many challenges, especially adoption. So we all know testing is mandatory. And with the pace of technology, manual testing just flat out, it just doesn't work. So G, as a noob to the space, I'd love to hear your thoughts on why a customer needs to do automated testing and why this is a challenge for so many organizations. Basically, why is test automation difficult for companies?
There's many reasons why people are unsuccessful, actually. And a lot of the time, it's nothing to do with the automation. I think we need to at least touch on subjects such as poor test environment management, or projects with no dedicated testers, no unit testing going on the application, because these are the things that actually cause massive instability and sort of means that you can't really operate to do reliable releases. So I think, though, for today, we're going to focus on test automation technology. But I think the minimum a company has to do, in my opinion, and this is a good way to maybe think about if you're a brand new user, you're doing manual testing and you want to get into automation, I would always start at the point where you go out to the business users and maybe say to them, look, we're going to do a release in 20 minutes of your favorite, very important app. And you'll say, well, what would you test now? You've only got 20 minutes. It's going live. Unless you hit a red flag, we're going live with this thing. And I think a lot of the time you'll find they immediately pick up the riskiest scenario they can think of, the one that would get them sacked. And to my mind, that's a really interesting discussion you can have with people understand, because that's why I would create the test first. And then all of a sudden you've got 10 minutes worth of manual testing converted into an automated test that covers maybe email testing, it maybe covers the payment gateway. And ultimately, straight away, you've got a really good smoke test. And I think that if sometimes you do that, I think what you might find is people will throw a recorder at that. They'll say, oh, well, tell you what, I've got this test now. We can see the people doing it. I'm just going to copy every one of those steps. And they end up with quite a long-running, maybe UI test, because that's what they were doing manually. And I think, again, the equation is to actually think, well, hold on, how do I capture this, but not necessarily with UI steps? And you end up with something pretty fragile, potentially.
What I'm hearing is like we have to validate the user experience, so the actual UI experience. Why is this the most difficult part? So could you hit me with some education knowledge? Why is this the challenge, or a challenge, or the challenge?
Yeah, but again, it's capturing that scenario to the satisfaction of the business user is the most important thing for me. And it doesn't have to be we do it the same way as they have done it. So again, we've been doing this for 11 years at Provar, and we've got some great examples of covering the most complex business assurance scenarios. But I think the key thing is because companies are so impatient to generate large number of coverage, it's really important that we capture things reliably. We need to think about how is it we are talking to the UI in order to ensure we don't end up with a maintenance headache. Because a lot of the time we do find these web applications changes. We have complex business applications. They've got their own sort of update cycle, etc. So we have to be really mindful that when we're building these things out, that we've got a good strategy about how to make sure we don't end up with a situation where our test cases are just constantly giving us a headache. So I think a regression testing strategy that's overly reliant on UA testing is prone to maintenance. And we'll talk about this a little bit before as we go through.
So again, what I'm understanding is you're saying that variations in pages make recorder testing technology a bad choice. Actually, you're saying it makes it a really bad choice.
Simply, yes.
Why is it so hard or tricky to even get to the locator for a particular element or a component?
I think we need to look at what we're testing. Look, if you test a simple web app, then to be honest, it's quite straightforward. I think the easiest HTML you've ever seen, to be honest, you're going to get easy test cases because you can rely. You've created the website, you know exactly what's on the field. There's no maintenance. It's just going to work. The problem is when it comes to business testing of likes of Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics, you tend to find these things are created with frameworks that are suitable for the developers. The developers are dragging and dropping complex components onto a bit of a canvas. They don't care about the nested HTML that's created because they're not testers. They're not thinking like the rest of the business need to sort of reassure the quality that's going on. So these frameworks create a testing maintenance problem, in my opinion. So we need solutions to that. I think the other thing is, in case of Salesforce is classic, they can genuinely trash the application on one of 3 releases a year. I haven't seen it so much of late, but obviously we see the transition from Classic to Lightning and Aura to LWC, and that related lists have moved around the screen, etc. So we have to be really careful when we're creating these tests. It could mean that genuinely we have 1 month and we can't keep up. I think the other things we have to talk through is, synchronous operations. Again, these complex frameworks that we're using for the business apps, they all update at different speeds, the components on the screen. You've got tabs or you've got a widget in the bottom left-hand corner that doesn't come in as quick as the top right-hand corner. This all needs to be taken into account because it will lead to fragile tests. I personally think one of the biggest things that you'll find is on big orgs. So that means that you have multiple teams working on it, which means they all potentially tread on each other's toes, which ultimately means you've got loads of data in the org. If you start moving between SIT and UAT, loads of data means that your data falls off the end of the list and you can't find it anymore. And again, test case that sort of tries to do what it did yesterday and all of a sudden the world's moved on, it starts to become tricky to sort of do it reliably. The next one on here is actually components not in the expected beginning state. What I mean by that is sometimes you get Service Cloud in this case is actually quite a good example, because if you start clicking around, you create lots of tabs. The next time you log in, they're still there. It doesn't have this restart. It sort of leaves you in the same state as you were yesterday. Problem with that is if you then highlight a different tab and you come in assuming that's the tab that's visible, it might not be. And then, of course, again, each example I'm giving is just another failed test. And you have
it's personalized for every person that logs in, right? That's what you're saying.
The person you've logged in at. But the reality is, the tester, sometimes on a project, will reuse in a test environment. Oh, I'm logging as a sales user. Doesn't stop a person sitting next to me to log in as the same sales user. And all of a sudden, we've got this indeterminate state of test, which means when I say I'm going to click on something and it's not there, and of course, it's because a different tab is visible. So what we have to then start doing is, reacting to that and go, well, oh my God, it's fragile. I can't have that to be fragile. And we have to start adding extra steps to our test. But again, other ideas are a lot of people might start identifying every element by label. That's actually quite brittle. It can be because sometimes, if in the case of Salesforce, again, you can have account name multiple times on a screen. when you've got these overlays, etc., and it can find the wrong one. But also the last point we're making here is about test data setup. I think this is a really important point. If you're doing UI steps in order to create the data you need to do the test, that can double, triple the size of your test. And you haven't even got to the point that you're interested in for the particular feature we're trying to test.
So why are the tests actually difficult to create? And I've got a question for you here, but I'll wait until you explain this first.
I mean, I do think there are data issues. I think we need to basically set up the data in order to make sure our tests are very deterministic. Otherwise, we will find that you'll get caught out. It could be you've got too much data in there, and it's just absolutely abused your SIT environment, and that causes issues. But why I would say is that you need to be able to consciously do that. And then navigation again. I mean, there's a lot of problems where, do you want extra test steps in order to get through the navigation menu, the top in Salesforce, for example, again? There's a lot of extra clicks involved in that. We want to get directly as quick as we can to the point of test. We've got to think about wait conditions. We've got to think, well, with all these asynchronous updates going on, how do I handle with them? How do I handle them reliably? A lot of the times you are with sort of open source frameworks, etc. You end up writing an awful lot of code to do something which looks inherently super simple. But then it will still fail on the overnight batch run because the conditions are different when you run it in a different environment, etc. So yeah, I think the Shadow DOM is one of the other classic examples. So Shadow DOM is used heavily.
So, can I just interrupt there? I did some research and I'd learned about Shadow DOMs. This was new to me, right? So I'd like to know about the specific challenges of Shadow DOMs. I know there's nuances, there's a lot of details here, but this is really interesting to me because I have done research in preparation for joining Provar.
Yeah, so Shadow DOMs aren't unique to Salesforce, and they are unique to web components. But I've got to say they are particularly used in Salesforce and not necessarily in other frameworks. But the reality is they're used heavily, and at the moment when you get different Salesforce releases and they're moving between Aura and LWC, you just start seeing the Shadow DOMs arrive within the pages, and you'll definitely see it within your custom pages. But the point is that we have to isolate. The point of the Shadow DOM is its design is there to isolate a component. So these Lightning Web components, and the reason for that is if you drop this component into a page, and it might not be the Salesforce page, it could be another app. You've got to make sure the CSS styles between the different parts of the web app don't start polluting each other. So, the rest of the page could accidentally affect the elements of that component. So what Shadow DOM's there to do is to encapsulate the component away from the rest of the page to ensure that its integrity is intact. And the problem is, from a testing perspective, we've got to break through that protective barrier in order to get into that component in order to test it, which is pretty tedious. A good example might be a Lightning Web component table dropped within a Lightning Web component tab, which again has to be enabled and what have you. And so each time you have to penetrate each of the Shadow DOMs which contain that component. And it really is an area where you get quite verbose, the usual XPath and CSS just doesn't work. And you have to start coding around these problems.
Do you want to talk about iframes or lack of ID info?
Yeah, I mean, the iframes actually, again, for Salesforce, where I've got most of my experience, is really those, when you use console applications, you'll tend to find that each one's an iframe. And again, you've got to specifically know the name of the frame. It could be a numeric name. And it's just a challenge. And then I think the last thing, we've got a lack of ID. When you sometimes look at and we'll see this later when we're testing React, you look at the actual source of a web page and you find that there's just hardly anything to go off. You've just got a bunch of numbers, a weird alphanumeric code, and you know very well that this will change. These things are generated. You do a redeployment, so you can't rely on it. And so, again, I sort of always, if you do use the type of recorder thing, you should always have a look to see what kind of stuff it's generating for your locators.
How can we help our testers address these problems?
Yeah, so I think, we've put this under sort of best practice. I think that we've got a number of things that we can be done. So if you click through, Nick, on this one, I think that, like I mentioned earlier, the most important thing we should start thinking about straight away is just test data management. We usually have these shared orgs, whether it's Salesforce or another application, and we have different people from different projects all diving in there, create whatever they like, and they don't think about test data. You'll see a count 1, 2, 3 a million times across the org, and it's irritating. We should have real data. The thing I would say is, as a philosophy, let's minimize the test steps. So if we can create that data at the API level, so much quicker, so much easier to maintain, we should. If we can use setup and teardown, so if you're running 20 tests and you need a base set of data, let's say 20 accounts, then some opportunities. If we're not testing account opportunity, why would we add all those clicks in order to get past those screens? Go straight into creating those data at the API level, and then remember to tear down. The tear down is basically referring to the fact that if I've created this data for my test, then delete it afterwards. Otherwise, it's still there in all the list views, the view, and clutters up the whole org. So I think, again, I would recommend use of APIs. I also would recommend intelligent use of unique IDs and functions. So a good example would be, don't create a test with sort of yesterday's date hard-coded. Again, you're now, from tomorrow, you're going to be doing backdated testing. And depending on what your scenario is, it's a nonsense. We need to be thinking about the date we want now. And all those functions in Provar perspective are also available to you. And again, if we're wanting to do verbose, handle-turny, lots of scenarios, then we should start considering data-driven testing, which we can do with databases or Excel in Provar. Navigation, we talked about that a little bit earlier. Navigate straight to where you need to start testing. Not every scenario is wanting to test every screen before it gets to the end, towards the end of the test. So, good examples for us is sometimes in Salesforce, you get these advisory messages. Your org is going to be refreshed at some point. That breaks your test, guaranteed, if you're going to be clicking through to get to where you want to be. It's a case of, again, when you're doing the console testing, which tab are we on? How do we get there? And of course, you can go over and start mapping it and clicking through it and all that kind of stuff. But a reliable way of doing that, even just choosing the app at the beginning of Salesforce, going to that screen, clicking it down, finding it. Now, I'll see custom frameworks when they go through a lot of clicks before even getting to the screen I want to test. Guess from a Provar perspective, we've got all that handled, and it's very straightforward. And same goes for log on and login as. We can do it without having to sort of go through all the different admin screens in order to find the user to then click through it. So it's really important to minimize these UI steps, is what I'm saying, and then find the point of test as soon as we can. So we've got rid of a lot of steps by doing API with data. Then we actually make sure the UI steps are a minimum. And I guess there's a bit of a don't do points here, because again, even the login page, we use OAuth and the right technologies in order to make sure we go in the most secure way. What we need to make sure is, again, see time and again, you see the password being passed in in plain text. That's just a big red flag. For our customers who are regulated industries, federal government customers, we need to be extremely careful about where our passwords are stored, encrypting the information, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's equally part of your navigation to get to the point of test.
So I think you're saying that Provar will actually figure a lot of these things out for us. So it just does it for you.
Yeah. I guess that's that time-served knowledge of focus that we've brought to the space, is a lot of things that possibly even our users that are on the call now take for granted, is that we get to the point of test as quick as we can. And when we get there, I think we do it in the most secure fashion.
So you mentioned a number of things, but I'm still curious. We talked about metadata. Why is that the key value point of how customers should start thinking about testing? So we all know the power of the platform. We've heard it at Force.com. Salesforce technology can become, I see, like a backbone of any company, flower shop, a healthcare company, a government entity. It's malleable, it's polymorphic. And I've shared this philosophy with my customers for almost 10 years. However, it needs to actually still work, right? Once you actually buy into that vision or you have the idea, it still needs to be tested.
Metadata is a fundamental part of our success. We are the only people who are fully using metadata to its fullest extent. And actually, a good example is, we have that knowledge, we bring it in, and you can see on the screen at the moment, we're talking about weight conditions as well. But that weight condition logic, that time-served knowledge of how to ensure, in the case of a Salesforce Lightning screen, it is fully loaded. What are the fields on that screen right now? What are the related lists that are on the screen right now? What's the data types on the screen? So I think from our perspective, we always wait for the throbber to stop. We wait for the individual components to load. We even retry in the event of failure as options, and we can configure different things. And, so that knowledge of metadata, that knowledge of Salesforce is all baked in to Provar. We're going to talk about 4 different ways of testing the UI now. Because again, I've led up to this point saying, don't do UI testing, but of course you have to. You just have to. It's a fundamental part of what we're delivering to the users. But let's, the testing pyramid, we've got the top part, which is always the UI steps, and we keep to a minimum. What we've got here is we've got 4 different types that I'm calling out here. And I don't think Provar's talked about it in this way before. So I think this is an interesting sort of stance by us. But we're saying DOM element testing is sort of the base. That's what everyone's doing. If you happen to sort of generate tests for Selenium, what have you, you're just getting DOM element testing. And we'll look into that. Enhanced element testing, we'll have a look at that. In our case, we're looking at React today. Intelligent web components, where again, we're fully recognizing that there are components on the screen. And then finally, dynamic metadata, which is what you were just referring to, Suk, which is very much our secret sauce. So let's go through to the next slide. So I want to go and initially talk about the generic DOM element. What does that mean to Provar? What do we do with this? So very simply, we store our locators in a page object, which is the standard pattern that you find in open source frameworks as well. Anyone who's done the SDET role will be familiar with that. And then our test cases use that definition in our page object to find the elements. And we'll typically use XPath, by label, JavaScript, etc. And on top of that, if you're a super advanced user, you can actually do custom code within those page objects if required. So we're never, ever stuck. But if you look on the right there, what I'm trying to call out is the fact that we've got certain things that potentially make our tests tricky, technically makes them hard, and whether this technology actually solves those problems. Now, as an example, I walked through all of them on this occasion, but we've seen it before. You sometimes come across it, and there's a lack of reliable IDs. If they're not in the DOM, this ID reliability is not there, we struggle. Again, if you can't handle the shadow DOMs, you struggle. The inconsistent beginning state, you have to do a lot of extra steps to get there. And again, the framework updates, you struggle. Dynamic IDs, you struggle. So there's nothing particularly in this layer that's solving those problems. But if we go to the next layer, we'll have a look. We're going to get rid of some X's, hopefully. This is now talking about the thing I'm going to demo today. And that's really saying enhanced element. Now, in this case, the demo, we're talking about React. But what's interesting about it is what we've discovered is in React, there are hidden fields. And those hidden fields can be accessed with JavaScript. So in this case, we've got same situation, test case, and we've got a page object. And then what we've got is potentially extra information we need to access in order to make this testing reliable. And they're hidden fields. So in our case, again, we're picking a few more of these ticks. And we'll see that a little bit better, I think. But the key thing we should look out for is we should always try and find the model. So the business applications, I think, have an API name or some sort of field name that the developer might have given it. In the case of Salesforce, we can get that from metadata. That's what makes the testing reliable for Salesforce. In the case of React, you'll probably find that whoever's developed it will have put one there as well. So for this type of technology, and if you go to the next slide, we then got our component type of technology. Again, what we're looking for is the field name again. And that component name in this case is, we think, the most maintainable piece. Rather than the name, the other sort of attributes you can find in the DOM, we're going straight into the IDs that make most sense for that technology. In this case, what we've got, if you think about LWC, we store component definition for LWC, and we store it in our own repository, which we can sync to. So if anything happens, changes with a new Salesforce release, for example, we will sync that down, and those updates are immediately available. So we define it once, use it multiple times, and Provar will ship the updates as needed. And the point is that we use these components in order to have maintainable locators. The component is just a thing we initially understand where it is on the screen. Then we have to say, now talk to the elements within it are much simpler because we understand the component itself. And again, in that case, we start to see lots of benefits. Our IDs are much more reliable. It manages shadow DOMs for us, and we start to sort of cope with the dynamic ID issue. And then, the thing at the top for us is metadata. To my mind, if we do this correctly, and if we keep ourselves up to date with all the Salesforce releases, which we do, this type of testing is sort of bulletproof because we're using Salesforce to test itself. And that's been the case for a number of years. So we download and sync the metadata from Salesforce, cache it if necessary, and then what happens is we talk to the individual field with sort of the API name itself. Again, it manages the console, it manages the shadow DOMs, and look, it's all gone green. But the point is that is, in my view, for the Lightning pages, unfortunately not for the whole internet, but for those pages, sort of the best way of testing them. So again, this diagram is really trying to say that, going up the stack, we can eliminate the causes of flakiness as we go through different technologies, and we have them available to us.
I appreciate this slide. This helps me with my learning and actually understanding all the complexities and the things we need to think about. So I really, really like this model. Okay, G, simple question. Super cool, everything you shared so far. We know Provar can handle Salesforce. Again, you said, Provar has been doing for 11 years. But and Nick knows this, everybody knows this, not everyone only has Salesforce. Enterprises have complex tech stacks, right? So maybe they've got Salesforce in one area of their business. Maybe they're using Dynamics or SAP. They've got specialized point solutions for very niche business needs. Can we help customers test platforms that are outside of Salesforce?
I mean, right from beginning in Provar, we've always had the page object model. So, I mean, we don't test or we don't focus a lot on these sort of desktop apps to test. It's more anything in a browser. And we're able to do that sort of DOM testing on everything. And because we can always reach out to, to do small snippets of code, what have you, there's nothing I've ever seen that we can't test. But the key thing as well, though, is that we're building out more features in order to be just smarter and smarter around the generic website testing that we need. And again, generic website testing, when sometimes you think about that, you think of a simple web page, but most of the time, and I was reading before, Claude was helping me out, he was basically saying that I think something like 40 to 50% of the top 10,000 websites are starting to use React. It's a complex component-based technology. If I got that stat wrong, check it on Claude. But I think that's one of the reasons why we are taking that particular framework seriously, but there are others. And, we're building out Provar in order to make sure we can be smarter and smarter for the end-to-end testing, to make sure we can do UI testing with Salesforce, UI testing with different Salesforce clouds. And then we start moving out to the other technologies, such as Microsoft Dynamics, and there's a myriad of ones, but very much that end-to-end testing, the business assured testing, going between all the different apps in the stack, AI, API, and into UI, I think is vital.
Gee, I know we've got limited time with you. I'd really like to see the demo and see what you're most excited about, what's coming from Provar.
First and foremost, because I've not done a webinar for a while, I wanted to geek out slightly on V3, which is our latest Provar version. I'm pretty proud of it because as a technology now, I find that it's pretty quick, it's responsive, and I think most importantly with brand new users, it's much more intuitive. It's clean and we can see everything on the screen. The navigation we've got on the left-hand side here, I think is much more easier to get around. And then, what we can see is we've got our tests, files, artifacts and assets, etc. Plans is really around when we're starting to hook up with the likes of Gearset, and we need to have, how do we execute a suite of tests, that type of thing, and really sort of get into that whole DevOps life cycle of having tailored packs for whatever's just been deployed. And then we can see our execution results, etc. And then finally Explorer, where we can see, for example, we've got Explorer things here where we can actually inspect straight into an object, see all its data. And this is where we can drag and drop into our test cases to create API steps, which I think is an extremely strong feature. We've also got settings. Now, one of the things that maybe not everyone's aware on this call, if you're Provar users, is we can now author in Edge as well.
Why would we look at Edge? I thought everybody uses Chrome.
I thought that as well, but actually we've got a couple of customers now, in particular some of the regulated ones, who, for one reason or another, started to question the security updates. There's a constant release cycle with Chrome, and I think some of these large enterprise customers are pushing them back towards Edge slightly. But again, from a Provar perspective, no opinion other than the fact that we support it. We've supported it for particular customers, and of course anyone can use it now within the product. So that means that we can author now in that way. The other thing, of course, I love is AI assistance, which I think is much more easier to find now because it's within the product. And I think that...
Can I just interject? I use this to learn Provar, and I found it so helpful. It goes through all of our documentation, I believe. It's fast. Basically like my GPT for Provar. So it's a fantastic learning tool. So props to product team in here.
And it's learning as it goes along as well to try and improve itself. But if you see here, I'll just search for data security, for example, and it starts to pull out certain features which satisfies that, and also goes into, in some cases, discrete steps in order to sort of help you whatever you need to resolve, essentially. So yeah, it's great, and it will get better with the more people that use it as well, with regards to its feedback.
Of course.
So yeah, that's sort of that. One thing I would show is these guys down the bottom. If you actually click that, it will actually show us a sort of more, a more complex looking screen, but sometimes that's what you want. You want to be able to see, I can see my tests, and I can also see what's running at the same time. So we can push that thing up and collapse it, bring it back up again. So there's small things for usability we've thought long and hard about. So what I want to do today, though, I mentioned React. And what we want to do is we want to look at BBC website. Now, I particularly chose this website because whenever I used to, in the early days of Provar, would always pull this thing up, which in the UK we use a lot. And I would always find it a nightmare to test. I know that sounds weird because it looks super simple, but this is based on React. So I just wanted to quickly show what this looks like. So if we, in Provar, again, if you're not a Provar user, we'd right click on this guy, add to test case. And what we'll see on the right-hand side is this will wake up and it will show us stuff on it. There's a lot of fields here. The only field I'm interested in today is this element locator. Now, again, going back to the presentation, if we look at the sort of DOM level testing, now that's all here. Our DOM level testing is this guy, for example. This is the one it would have defaulted before the change we just made. And if you look at it, I don't like it. I don't like the fact that it's got all these slashes, and it's pretty complex, but you can make your own mind up about that. And if you don't like it, it's always been the case in Provar, you can override it with the CSS, you can override it if there's a JavaScript one, etc. And use link testing for label testing, etc. So that's your choice. However, let's just have a look at this locator we've got here. It's the React, and you'll see it's got this notion of React here. Now, what we're able to do is if I click into this field, it will show the headline is selected. Now, why is that interesting? It's interesting because all of these fields you're seeing here are not in the DOM. They are in the hidden fields, so they can be accessed via JavaScript underneath the covers, essentially. So what I would be looking for here, again, if this was a business app and not the BBC websites, is some sort of field ID, which I would suggest is a very reliable way of finding the field. And so ultimately what we can click around here as well, and we can have a look through it. Now, for example, you can see it has found the headline. Now, this is against the component. It finds this field firstly based on finding this component. And this component is called the uncontained promo wrapper. I appreciate it's slightly technical, but I think it's important to understand the point. But it's saying find component. Once I've found it, I can find the child, which is Middle East in this case. So if I turned off this guy, then you will notice that it's finding a lot more on the screen. And if I try and map this guy, you'll notice that, again, we can find all the components on the screen as well by just going into this and making this simple for the headline.
Gee, you had a question. So even Middle East, I'm sure it shows up multiple times on a page, right?
Yeah, so let's have a look at Middle East quickly. So if we go to the label locator of that by going here, let's just map it first. And then go to label. It will tell us. So if I choose label, so Middle East has got it, well done. But let's see if there's any more. And there's usually quite a lot on the website these days about Middle East. We got another one. So we run the risk, obviously, on this page that ultimately we'll find the wrong one. So I think the key thing that this technology, on a very high level, I don't think this is the best example either. Business app has much more compelling, obvious reasons, but this means that ultimately, I don't know which one of those it's going to catch. But by going through the React label here, we're able to sort of intelligently understand, no, I want this component. And you'll notice the one down here, fingers crossed, isn't, I'm into the sports now, isn't highlighted. There we go.
There it is. Yeah.
Because it's only matched to the component first, then it matches to its child field. I mean, just to hammer home the point, maybe, if we have a look at the web page here for that, you'll see this is the component, uncontained promo wrapper. And if you ever look down, if I talk about sort of unreliable IDs, there's a lot of gobbledygook here because it's a framework. If you wanted to see the React stuff, you would probably be installing something like this, React Developer Tools, into your Chrome. And then you go to components and you'll see against uncontained promo wrapper, in this case, you have these fields. And this is what we are sucking out and putting into Test Builder, because I genuinely think there usually is some goodness in there that we should use to make our testing reliable. And again, the good news here, this is not a Salesforce thing. This is going to work on React websites, and very happy to anyone on the call who thinks they've got a killer React website that we should try it out on, please let us know. Okay, I think that's the end of what I wanted to show today. I'd love to show you more Salesforce, but we've done that lots of times. But I think just to sort of demonstrate the latest and greatest support for something like React, I think was useful.
I'd like to just review what I learned. Is that cool, G?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So simplistically, from my understanding, UI tests are fragile and they're difficult to maintain. So what I was thinking is the root cause is because the element location breaks easily, especially in complex architectures, right? And especially with modern web architectures, that complicates testing. And then when we have layered UI structures, so if you've got deeply nested iframes or shadow DOMs that hide elements, it makes it more complex. And also, the highlight you made about React, there's constant changes in frameworks. And that make the traditional strategy or approach to traditional locators, it makes it unreliable. I learned that Provar has a multifaceted approach to this, to make things more reliable. So there's metadata-driven testing, which decouples the tests from the UI structure, so to minimize the breakages. We've got component-based testing, so you can build robust, I'd say reusable and test logic around those UI components. And then we've got enhanced element testing. So we've got specialized technology to successfully interact with things like, again, the shadow DOMs, hidden fields, framework-specific components, again, like React, Salesforce, LWC, etc. Is that good summary of what I should take away from this, G? Did I miss anything?
Well, that's not bad after 30 days, Sucks. Well done.
What's next for testing, G?
I think we've got interesting webinars coming up as well, by the way. And I can see, I'm looking in the webinar chat as we go along, and there's some questions about AI, etc. And I think the purpose of this webinar wasn't AI, but hopefully if you've seen other ones, you've noticed we've been using it for test step generation, check test case generation, which we're doing in sort of our Salesforce application as well. And I think that, again, my opinion around locators and some of the AI generated ones, it's still an option to use that. But I think a lot of the time they're really just permutations of the DOM locator at this stage. They're not fully understanding the frameworks they're testing in a reusable fashion. Obviously, AI is moving at a rate of knots. And I think I can see a question about MCP Provar, which we definitely have those type of things on our roadmap as well. But right now, in version 3, they're not there. And to someone else's question, this is version 3, but it is a latest development version that I'm showing today.
Thanks, guys. That was great. And we kind of moved into a bit of Q&A. If there is any additional questions, please do put them in the Q&A section. So just to reiterate, so that the question that you referenced there about AI, actually just came to the host and panelists. I replied in the chat to everyone, but is there such a thing as MCP Provar? And the answer is no, not currently. But as G said, we've got lots of exciting things coming and planned for the next 6 to 12 months. So do join our future webinars, keep in touch with what's going on, because we're innovating on a weekly basis in that regard. And then there was a question about what version was that G was showing. Yeah, that is version 3. So that is our latest version of automation.
It's bleeding edge V3.
Bleeding edge V3.
Because I wanted to show the React stuff, but it's not in a build that anyone can use yet, but it will be.
Yeah, that will be coming. So any current customers on the call, if you're interested in getting your hands on the latest release version of V3, then do give your CS manager a shout, and they'll be able to talk to you about that and the process for moving across to there. Just check the QA. Yeah, so when will V3 be available for download? It's not yet generally available, but we're going through customer by customer basis of migration. So as I say, do please get in touch with customer success or make a note in the chat you're very interested, and then we'll proactively contact you about that and get you get your hands on it as soon as we can. Right, there's no other.
There is one from Michael Daly.
Michael Daly, I know that guy.
And for regular listeners, you
Can the same test scenario you demonstrated be run as part of a pipeline?
Yeah, well, it can. Thank you, Michael, for asking. So yeah, I mean, look, one thing is authoring our tests. One thing is making them reliable with good technology. But the ultimate goal, of course, is to make sure that we're running extremely regularly reliable tests and reducing the risk of any changes that we've made in the development lifecycle. So we would typically work with our own test plans, which is the mechanism for sort of organizing what runs in a suite of tests. And then we start to be part of an orchestrated build along with our DevOps partners. So, we've got the likes of GearSet in place and we work regularly with in order to kick off builds, and then Provar will execute against that environment and feedback our results. I think that our results will end up in our Provar quality manager. This means that you can see dashboards and you can see all drill into tests, and this is where a lot of our AI exists as well with regards to jet test generation.
Okay, a couple more questions have come in. So what's new regarding the speed of automated testing?
Well, I guess I don't know how to read that question. If it's improving the speed of execution in Provar, I think we spent a lot of time in V3, the latest version, improving on that, but I'd love to get some feedback on that. There's also the general speed of the application itself is, in my opinion, vastly improved as well. It's much quicker launching, etc. So I don't know the scope of the question, but I would say that one thing is true. The speed of development in automated testing as a market is phenomenal right now. Really interesting space to be in. And we're super proud to be leading the way in many ways, and also keeping a very strong eye on what the best in class is appearing and making sure that's part of our roadmap.
and this is quite a specific question, I think, but outside of CI/CD automation runs, any update to push run to in-network PC with Provar execute installed?
It's again quite a hard question because I don't fully understand it. But I'm going to answer something I think I understand, and that is saying if we're not running in the cloud, which Provar can, we've got Provar Grid, by the way, we can run in the cloud, but a lot of customers use Provar to run on like a virtual server or also browser stack, etc. So, and that's totally in scope and is possible right now. So I'm not quite sure what the update would be. My guess is from the question, David, if you want to clarify, is that could be that has had an issue or something, or there's some use case that we're not supporting. I don't know. But ultimately, that's a very common use case for us that we would execute. You can run on the machine you've authored on, but more commonly, you would have something running overnight, and you wouldn't want your laptop getting thrashed every night. You want it running multiple threads of a complete regression pack, so you can run potentially thousands of tests in 1 hour, get the results back or consolidated back into your Provar manager, and ultimately, ready for you in the morning to sign off the release and go live.
If there is something there specific that you need some support with, do reach out to your customer success manager, and we'd be happy to talk about that in a bit more detail. Cool. I think that's it for our Q&A. So just to close up, just to let everyone know what's coming up for Provar, we will be at Dreamforce next week. So anyone in San Francisco, we look forward to seeing you there. And our very own Michael Daly will be doing a talk on the Thursday, Testing Without Limits, Agentforce testing at scale. So a lot more forward looking into the AI era that is coming, how Provar can help with that going forward. And then lastly, our next webinar is 3 weeks' time, where we look into the true ROI of test automation, looking a bit more strategic and high level about how we relate all of these great things that we can do through test automation into real business outcomes. And that will be with Spencer Clubb, who I believe joined the webinar earlier. Hope you're still there, Spencer, who is Quality Assurance Lead at Accenture. So really looking forward to that one in 3 weeks' time. But otherwise, I'd like to say thanks to G, thanks to Suk, really great stuff. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we will see you next time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.